The valley had always been my safe place, a hidden corner of the world where the mountains stood tall like silent guardians and the river wound through the trees like a silver ribbon. I had been away for years, busy with work and city life, but deep inside, I knew I would return. The day I drove back down that familiar dirt road, dust swirling in the late afternoon sun, I felt a mix of excitement and calm. This was my cabin, my retreat, my land. Nothing could change that, or at least, that's what I thought. When I rounded the last bend and saw the driveway, my excitement turned into confusion. A shiny metal gate stood where there had never been one before. Attached to the post was a keypad, a chain-link fence stretching on either side, and bold letters on a sign that read, "Private Community Property, HOA Members Only." For a moment, I thought I had taken the wrong turn. But as I looked past the gate, I recognized the winding gravel drive that led straight to my cabin porch. It was the same road I had walked 100 times. Only now, someone had blocked it off like it belonged to them. I pulled my truck up and stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing louder than usual. The air smelled the same, pine needles, mountain soil, the faint hint of wood smoke carried from somewhere distant. But the sight of that sign gnawed at me. HOA property? Members only? What kind of joke was this? I shook my head, walked to the gate, and pushed it. Locked tight. Someone had taken it upon themselves to claim land that wasn't theirs. I fished in my glove compartment, pulling out the old folder I had kept safe all these years. Inside was the deed to the land, yellowed at the edges but still clear. Every acre, every trail, every ridge of this valley was in my name. And yet, someone thought they could slap up a gate and pretend otherwise. As I was examining the sign, I heard the sharp sound of heels on gravel and a voice like nails on a chalkboard cut through the quiet evening. "Excuse me. Just what do you think you're doing?" I turned to see a woman marching toward me, clipboard in hand like it was her badge of authority. She looked like she had stepped straight out of a suburban HOA meeting, perfectly trimmed blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and an outfit too polished for the dusty valley road. She stopped just a few feet away, glaring at me over the rim of her glasses. "This is private property," she snapped. "You can't just waltz in here like you own the place." I raised an eyebrow, trying not to laugh at the irony. "That's because I do own the place," I said calmly. Her face tightened. "Impossible. This is HOA land. I'm the president of the association, and we don't recognize trespassers here. You'll need to leave immediately." I pulled the folder out and held up the deed. "Funny you should say that. This document right here says otherwise. My family bought this entire valley decades ago. Every tree, every rock, every trail belongs to me." She blinked but quickly recovered, puffing up her chest like a cat trying to look bigger. "Oh please. Paperwork means nothing. We've maintained this valley for years, cleaned the trails, put in signs, even landscaped. That makes it HOA jurisdiction. You can't just roll in with some old piece of paper and claim ownership." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Lady, you don't seem to get it. You've been building things and putting up signs on land that never belonged to you. I didn't roll in with some old paper. This is a legal deed filed with the county. The valley is mine." Her nostrils flared, and she took a step closer, waving her clipboard like she was issuing a ticket. "I will not be spoken to this way. You're violating our community rules. I'll call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing." I leaned against the gate, folding my arms. "Go ahead. Call the sheriff. I'd love to see his reaction when you tell him the actual landowner is trespassing on his own property." She glared, muttering under her breath as she fumbled with her phone. "We'll see about that. We have rights, and you'll regret trying to pull this stunt." While she dialed, I took my time pushing the gate. Locked or not, my cabin was just a short walk up the road, and I had the key to its front door. I swung my bag over my shoulder and started walking past the gate, ignoring her protests. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt like a homecoming. Each step reminded me of mornings I had spent here fishing by the creek, nights under the stars listening to the forest, and afternoons chopping wood by the cabin. This valley wasn't just land to me, it was part of my life, my history. As I reached the porch, I pulled out the key and slid it into the lock. It turned smoothly, clicking open like it always had. When the door creaked wide, the smell of cedar and old pine wood washed over me. Memories rushed in, the warmth of the fireplace, the sound of rain tapping the roof, the way the sun painted golden streaks through the windows. This was mine. And no fake HOA president was going to take it from me. Behind me, I heard her gasp. "You had a key made. That's illegal. Breaking and entering." I laughed, shaking my head as I set my bag down inside. "This is my house. My key. If anyone's trespassing, it's you." She sputtered like an engine that wouldn't start, her face turning red as she jabbed her finger in my direction. You don't understand who you're dealing with. I am the president of this HOA, and my word is law here." I turned slowly, meeting her glare with a calm smile. "No. Your rules don't apply here. This isn't your cul-de-sac with mailboxes and pool passes. This is a valley that I own. You can put up as many fake signs and gates as you want, but at the end of the day, it's mine. And if you keep pushing, you're going to regret it." For the first time, she faltered. Her lips trembled as she tried to fire back, but no words came out. Then she straightened her shoulders again, clinging to her last shred of false authority. "We'll see what the sheriff says. You're not going to get away with this." And right then, as if fate wanted to make a point, I heard the faint rumble of tires on gravel. A county sheriff's SUV rolled down the drive, lights flashing. Karen lit up like she had just been handed victory, waving her arms dramatically. "Over here, officer. Over here," she yelled. "Arrest this man, he's breaking into our community property." The SUV stopped, and the sheriff stepped out, adjusting his hat as his eyes fell on me. His expression was stern, unreadable, at least at first. Then, slowly, his face broke into a grin. He walked over, extending his hand. "Well, I'll be," he said warmly. "Welcome back. It's been a long time since you set foot in your valley." Behind him, Karen's mouth fell open, her triumphant smirk melting into pure shock. The look on her face was priceless, the kind of expression that told me she had just realized she was in way over her head. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but nothing came out. Finally, she managed a weak stammer. "Wait, you know him?" The sheriff turned his head slowly, giving her a look that carried more weight than any words could. "Know him?" he repeated. "Ma'am, this man is the rightful owner of every inch of this valley. Has been for decades. His family purchased the deed fair and square before you or your so-called HOA ever dreamed of setting foot here. You've been trespassing on his land this whole time." Her clipboard slipped from her hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The sheriff's words hung in the air like thunder, and for a long moment, all I could hear was the breeze rustling through the pine trees. Karen's face turned beet red. She jabbed her finger toward me, her voice shrill and desperate. "That's impossible. We put up gates, we cleaned the trails, we built picnic areas and even a playground. We've charged fees for years. That makes this community ours." The sheriff let out a slow breath, shaking his head like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "No, ma'am. That doesn't make it yours. What you did is called encroachment, and the fees you collected? That's fraud. You can't just take someone else's property, slap a sign on it, and start playing landlord." I leaned against the porch railing, arms folded, watching her unravel. "So all those fines and rules you've been throwing at people, all those threats about towing vehicles and kicking people out, they were all lies?" She spun around, her voice breaking as she tried to hold on to her authority. No. They weren't lies. I had every right. I made this community what it is today. Without me, it would have just been an empty valley full of weeds. I laughed, shaking my head. Lady, this valley was beautiful long before you ever showed up with your clipboards and fences. The rivers, the mountains, the trails, they don't need you. You didn't create anything here. You just took advantage of what was already mine. The sheriff radioed something back to dispatch, his voice calm but firm. We're gonna need to open an investigation. Possible fraud, misuse of funds, trespassing, might be bigger than it looks. Karen's composure shattered. Her shoulders slumped, her hands trembled, and her voice lost the sharp edge it once carried. You can't do this to me, she whispered. I built my life around this. Everyone respects me. Everyone follows my rules. The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice but keeping it stern. Respect doesn't come from lies, ma'am. And rules mean nothing if they're built on land that doesn't belong to you. For a long moment, Karen stood frozen, her world collapsing piece by piece. The woman who had strutted into my driveway full of arrogance and false power now looked small, like a balloon losing air. I decided to twist the knife just a little. Tell me, Karen, I said evenly, how much money did you make off my land? How many families did you fine, threaten, or bully into paying for things they never owed? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted toward the sheriff as if hoping for rescue, but all she found was his stern gaze. She finally muttered something, but it was too low to catch. What was that? I asked, leaning forward. Her voice cracked as she raised it. A lot, okay? A lot. People paid because they believed in me, because I told them I was in charge. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Then you admit you collected money under false pretenses. She gasped. No. No, it wasn't false, I believed it was mine. The sheriff sighed. Believing a lie doesn't make it true. And now you've got a real mess on your hands. Karen's knees looked like they were about to buckle. She gripped the edge of her clipboard for support, her knuckles white. You don't understand. If this gets out, I'll lose everything, my reputation, my friends, my home. I cut her off. That's what happens when you build your life on something that was never yours to begin with. You took advantage of good people. You tried to take what didn't belong to you. And now you're paying the price. The sheriff nodded in agreement. Ma'am, we'll be reviewing financial records, interviewing residents, and taking statements. I suggest you cooperate, because if you fight this, it'll only get worse. For once, Karen was silent. She didn't argue, didn't puff up her chest, didn't wave her clipboard like a sword. She just stood there trembling, staring at the ground as if it might swallow her whole. The sheriff turned to me, his expression softening. Sorry you had to come back to this mess. But I promise you, we'll set it right. This valley will be restored to your control, and the people she's been taking money from will get the truth. I gave him a nod of gratitude. Appreciate that, Sheriff. All I ever wanted was peace out here. This cabin and this land mean more to me than anything, and I won't let anyone take that away. He tipped his hat. And you won't have to. We'll handle it. With that, he motioned to his deputy, who had arrived in a second SUV. They began photographing the signs, the gate, the clipboard, everything that tied her fraudulent HOA to the land. Karen stood frozen as the evidence was collected, her empire of control crumbling before her eyes. I walked back into the cabin, letting the screen door creak shut behind me. Inside, everything was just as I remembered, the wooden beams overhead, the stone fireplace in the corner, the old rocking chair by the window. It felt like no time had passed at all, like the valley had been waiting for me to return. As I set my bag down, I glanced out the window and saw Karen still standing there, arguing weakly with the deputies as they documented her fraud. She looked smaller now, stripped of her false authority, just another person who thought power came from controlling others. The truth was, real power comes from ownership, from history, from respect, and she had none of those things here. I poured myself a glass of water from the old jug on the counter and leaned against the window frame, watching the scene unfold outside. For years, Karen had probably strutted around this valley, barking orders, handing out fines, making people fear her. And in just a few minutes, the sheriff had torn down the facade and revealed the truth. The valley was mine. It always had been. And now, finally, everyone knew it. The thought made me smile. She had no idea what she was walking into when she confronted me at that gate. She thought I was just some drifter, some outsider. Instead, she picked a fight with the one man she could never control, the rightful owner of everything she claimed to rule. The irony was almost too perfect. Outside, the sheriff's voice carried across the yard. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us to answer some questions at the station." Karen's protest was weak, shaky. But this is my community. They need me." The sheriff's answer was firm. "No, ma'am. They don't." And just like that, she was escorted to the cruiser, her clipboard left abandoned on the ground like a relic of the fake power she once wielded. I closed my eyes, listening to the wind moving through the trees, the sound of the river not far off, the distant call of an owl starting its evening song. The valley was at peace again, and so was I. The days that followed felt like the valley itself was breathing again, as though the trees and the hills had been waiting for this moment of freedom. Word spread quickly among the so-called HOA members that the woman they had trusted, obeyed, and feared had been nothing more than a fraud. Families who had paid her ridiculous maintenance fees and fines for things as small as planting the wrong flowers or parking in the wrong spot began piecing together how badly they had been taken advantage of. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee in the early mornings, as car after car rolled past, curious neighbors stopping to introduce themselves and offer their thanks. Most of them were embarrassed, ashamed even, that they had gone along with her rules without questioning. One older man with a worn-out ball cap shook my hand firmly and said, "I've lived here 20 years. She made my life hell. Fine me for cutting down a dead tree in my own yard because it wasn't approved by the HOA. I paid her thousands. To know it was all a scam, well, you don't know how much this means to me." I told him I understood, because I truly did. Power-hungry people like Karen thrived on fear and ignorance. They wrapped their lies in official-sounding words like bylaws and community standards, and good, hard-working people just gave in because they didn't want trouble. But the difference now was that the truth was out, and truth has a way of burning down lies no matter how big they look. The sheriff came back almost daily that first week, his deputies carrying boxes of files, receipts, and complaint letters they'd pulled from Karen's little office in town. It turned out she had an entire room stacked with binders where she had documented every so-called violation, every dollar collected, every phony rule she invented. At first glance, it almost looked professional, rows of folders labeled with family names, maps of the valley with highlighted zones, printouts of fake violation notices stamped with her signature. But when the deputies dug deeper, it all unraveled. She had been charging people for things she didn't own, fining them for breaking rules that never legally existed, and pocketing every cent. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars a year, all flowing straight into her bank account. When the news broke, the community's reaction was like a dam bursting. People who had cowered under her threats were suddenly furious. A couple who lived near the lake came storming up my driveway one evening. "She charged us $3,000 for building a dock," the husband said, his voice shaking with anger. "Said it was against HOA policy unless we paid a special fee. We nearly lost our savings paying that woman." His wife added, "And all this time, it wasn't even her land. It was yours. She scammed us right in our own backyard." I listened, nodding slowly. "You're not alone," I told them. "She scammed dozens of people. Maybe more. But now, you don't have to live under her rules anymore. This valley is free again." They both let out heavy sighs, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The sheriff's office eventually set up a town meeting at the local community center, inviting every resident in the valley to come and hear the truth. I was asked to speak, something I wasn't entirely comfortable with, but I knew it had to be done. That night, the room was packed wall to wall. Neighbors who had never met me before filled the seats, their faces a mixture of anger, relief, and curiosity. At the front, the sheriff laid out the facts in plain language. The HOA was never real, Karen had no authority, and all fees collected had been fraudulent. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium. The murmurs quieted, every eye in the room fixed on me. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of the moment. "I'm not much for speeches," I began, "but I'll say this valley has always been mine, yes, but more importantly, it's always belonged to all of us who live here. The mountains, the lake, the trails, they don't need rules and fines to stay beautiful. They just need respect. And respect doesn't come from fear or fake authority. It comes from how we treat the land, and how we treat each other." The room was silent for a beat, then someone started clapping. Soon the whole place erupted in applause. It wasn't for me personally, it was for freedom, for the relief of finally being out from under Karen's thumb. For the first time in years, people felt like they could breathe again. Karen herself was nowhere to be seen that night. Word was she had been released on bail but was under heavy investigation. Some said she was hiding out in her house, too ashamed to show her face. Others whispered she might flee the state before the charges could stick. But no matter what she did, her empire was gone. The sheriff assured everyone that restitution would be pursued, that the money she took would be returned as much as possible. In the days that followed, I walked the valley more than I had in years. I hiked the trails, sat by the lake, visited the ridges where you could see the whole world spread out beneath you. Everywhere I went, I saw signs of Karen's intrusion, HOA property nailed to trees, fake notices taped to cabins, members only stickers slapped onto benches. Bit by bit, residents began tearing them down. It was almost ceremonial, neighbors gathering in small groups to rip down signs, toss them into piles, and light them on fire. The smoke curled up into the sky, a symbol that the valley was finally rid of her poison. One afternoon, as I was chopping wood by the cabin, the sheriff pulled up again. He leaned on his cruiser, arms crossed, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Never thought I'd see the day this valley went back to the way it should be," he said. "Peaceful. Quiet. Yours." I wiped the sweat from my forehead. "Feels good, Sheriff. Like things are finally right again." He nodded. "Funny thing about people like Karen. They think power comes from controlling others, from barking orders and waving papers. But real power?" He gestured to the trees around us. "It's right here. Owning land, working it, respecting it. That's power no one can fake." I smiled, feeling the truth in his words. She thought she could take the valley from me. But the thing about this place is, it doesn't bend to arrogance. The valley remembers who it belongs to. The sheriff laughed softly. "And now, everyone else remembers too." That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, the sky painted in streaks of orange and purple. The crickets chirped, the river hummed in the distance, and the cabin's lanterns glowed warmly against the darkening woods. I thought about Karen, about her downfall, and about the neighbors finally free of her grip. She had strutted around like a queen, but in the end, she was just another pretender, undone by her own greed. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath of the mountain air. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. The valley was mine again, not just by deed, but by spirit. And this time, I knew nothing and no one would ever take it away. Weeks passed, and the valley slowly shed the last remnants of Karen's grip. Where once there had been fear and silence, now there was laughter, the sound of children playing near the creek, families gathering on porches, neighbors waving as they passed each other on the winding roads. It was like the place itself was healing, the weight of false authority finally lifted. Every morning, I'd wake to the call of the birds echoing off the hills, sip coffee on my porch, and watch the mist roll through the trees. It was the kind of peace I had dreamed about during all those years in the city, and now it was mine again. But with peace also came responsibility. The sheriff stopped by one morning with an update. He parked his cruiser by the cabin, crunching over the gravel, and stepped out with a stack of papers in his hand. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, handing me the documents. They were reports from the county prosecutor. Karen was facing a long list of charges: fraud, misrepresentation, illegal collection of funds, and even trespassing. The evidence they had collected from her so-called office was overwhelming. Dozens of residents had submitted complaints and testimonies, and the dollar amounts of what she had taken were staggering. "If the judge sees it through," the sheriff said, "she won't just lose her reputation. She could lose everything." I nodded slowly, not with joy, but with a kind of quiet satisfaction. She had tried to take what wasn't hers, had bullied good people into submission, and now she was going to face the consequences. Justice wasn't always quick, but here in this valley, it had come down like a hammer. The sheriff added, "Folks are asking if you're planning on forming a real community association. Something fair this time, not like what she did." I laughed, shaking my head. "The only rules I'll ever enforce out here are respect the land and respect each other. This valley doesn't need meetings and fines. It needs people who care for it, the way my family always did." The sheriff tipped his hat, smiling. "That's good enough for me." Later that week, I decided to host something I hadn't done in years, a gathering at the cabin. Word spread quickly, and soon families began arriving with dishes of food, kids running across the yard, neighbors carrying guitars and coolers. For the first time in a long time, the cabin came alive with voices and laughter. People shared stories of how Karen had tormented them with fake fines and absurd rules, but instead of anger, there was relief, even humor. A man told how she fined him for leaving his porch light on too late, claiming it disrupted the community's sleep. Another laughed as he recalled being ordered to repaint his fence because it was an unauthorized color. Every tale ended with shaking heads and laughter, the absurdity of it all finally clear now that her power was gone. As the night went on, the fire crackled in the pit, and someone strummed a guitar. I stood on the porch, looking out over the crowd, and felt something I hadn't felt in years: community. Not one built on control or fake authority, but on freedom, respect, and shared appreciation for the valley we all called home. The stars lit up the sky, brighter than any city light could ever allow, and for a moment, I realized just how much had been stolen by Karen's lies, not just money, but peace, trust, and joy. And now, all of it was coming back. Karen herself became something of a ghost story in the valley. Some said she had packed up and left town, too embarrassed to face anyone. Others swore they'd seen her grocery shopping in the next county, her head down, hoping no one would recognize her. Wherever she was no longer a threat here. Her power had been an illusion, and once it was shattered, there was nothing left for her to cling to. One evening, the sheriff dropped by again, this time without papers or reports. He sat with me on the porch, both of us sipping coffee as the sun sank behind the hills. "You know," he said after a long pause, "Karen really thought she owned this place. Acted like the valley bowed to her. But in the end, the valley doesn't belong to someone who just pretends. It belongs to the one who respects it, lives with it, and protects it. That's you." I looked out at the land, the rolling fields, the line of trees swaying in the evening wind, and I knew he was right. Ownership wasn't just about a piece of paper, though the deed proved it legally. It was about history, connection, and care. This valley had been in my family for generations, and I had returned not just to reclaim it from Karen but to preserve it for what it truly was, a sanctuary. Over the next few weeks, I set about making small improvements. I repaired the old dock by the lake, fixed up the trails that had been neglected, and planted a new garden by the cabin porch. Neighbors offered to help, and together we rebuilt what Karen had tried to tear down. It wasn't about control, it was about working side by side, each person contributing in their own way. A sense of pride began to grow in everyone who lived here, not because they were forced to by some fake set of rules, but because they wanted to. One morning, as I sat on the porch with a steaming mug in hand, I thought about the irony of it all. Karen had built her entire identity on control, on pretending to have authority, and she ended up with nothing. I had returned quietly, without fanfare, and simply stood firm in the truth, and in the end, the valley itself had proven me right. I smiled as a hawk soared high above the hills, its cry echoing across the valley. The land was alive again, free, untamed, and mine. No one could ever take that away, not with gates, not with signs, not with lies. The valley belonged to me, and more than that, it belonged to everyone who respected it. As the days turned into weeks, life settled into a rhythm. I chopped wood in the mornings, fished in the afternoons, and shared meals with neighbors in the evenings. The sound of laughter returned to the valley, blending with the natural chorus of crickets, frogs, and wind through the pines. It felt like balance had been restored. And sometimes, when I thought back on that first day, the locked gate, the fake signs, Karen's shrill voice yelling that I was trespassing, I couldn't help but chuckle. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She thought she was the queen of this valley, the lawmaker, the ruler. But the truth had a way of humbling even the loudest pretender. Now, when I looked across the land at sunset, the light spilling gold across the fields and the cabin glowing warmly behind me, I knew one thing for certain: this valley would always endure. Long after Karen was forgotten, long after her lies crumbled into dust, the valley would still be here, strong, beautiful, and untouchable. And so would I.